Since the beginning of Christianity, Christians have had a problem with the idea of Jesus' second coming. In the Christian Bible, he is quoted numerous times as allegedly saying that he will return soon. In Matthew chapter 16, verse 28, he's quoted to have supposedly said to his disciples, "There are some of you standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." Or Matthew 24, where Jesus is quoted as describing what will happen before he returns. And then he says in verse 34, "Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all of these things take place." Of course, Jesus did not return in that generation, and he didn't return in the generation after that. And since then, there's been a very long history of endless forecasts of his imminent return. Edgar Whisenant published a book in 1988 titled 88 Reasons Why the Rapture Will Be in 1988. He predicted it would take place between September 11th and September 13th. 4.5 million copies of that book were sold in bookstores, and Whisenant was quoted as saying, "Only if the Bible is in error am I wrong. And I say to every preacher in town, if I could gamble with my life, I would stake my life on Rosh Hashanah 1988. Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, fell on that year, in September 11th or 12th or 13th or whatever, the days that he predicted. As his date approached, after he released this book, regular programming on the Christian Trinity Broadcasting Network was interrupted to provide special instructions on preparing for the rapture. What is the rapture? The rapture is the belief, widely held by many evangelical Christians today, that believers in Jesus, both those who are living and those who will be brought back from the dead, will be whisked up into the air to meet Jesus when he comes in his second coming, and then taken up to heaven with him. Now, when his predicted date in 1988 failed to materialize, Whisenant wrote other books predicting 1989, and then 1993, and then 1994, and he continued until 1997. Finally, he passed away in the year 2001. Now, for Christendom to have maintained this kind of enthusiasm about the return of Jesus for 2,000 years, it's not been easy. And there has often been a desperate grasping for any new wrinkle or gimmick that might capture the attention of the masses. One recent example, which was fueled by the amplifying power of the internet, concerned the curious occurrence of 4 total lunar eclipses in the years 2014 to 2015. These kinds of eclipses are occasionally called blood moons because sometimes there is a reddish appearance to these lunar eclipses. However, the color of the moon depends on a number of factors, including atmospheric conditions, so these eclipses don't always look red. Now, part of what attracted so much curiosity and excitement in those years was that the eclipses were set to fall out on the first day of Passover, and then on the first day of Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles, in the year 2014, and then again on the same dates in the year 2015. And as a bonus, the total lunar eclipse of Passover 2015 would be preceded by a total solar eclipse 2 weeks earlier. Now, the last time that this array of eclipses fell out, where you have 2 years in a row where the eclipses, the full solar and lunar eclipses fall on these same dates, the last time it happened was in 1967 to 1968. Before that was 1949 to 1950. And before that, all the way back to 1493 and 1494. Now, most people would probably find this to be very interesting. Look at that. 2 years in a row where there's a total lunar eclipse on the first day of Passover and on the first day of Sukkot, and it happens the same way again the following year. So most people would find this very interesting. But to the intrepid Christian evangelist John Hagee, it could only mean one thing: the rapture and the second coming of Jesus. Now, what was his reasoning? So he assumed that 4 red moons in a 2-year period on these holidays must have some great significance for the Jewish people. So he looked back in history. He said, well, let's look. 1967 to 1968, which was the prior time before 2014, 2015. So that was the time which was the reunification of Jerusalem. It's pretty significant for the Jewish people. We recaptured Jerusalem in the Six-Day War in 1967, which was in June, and the reunification took place into 1968 as well. And then prior to that, the previous set of 4 red moons was 1949 to 1950, and Hagee claims that this was the founding of the modern state of Israel. Now, of course, he was off by a year because that happened in 1948, not 49 to 50. And then 1493 to 1494, what was significant for the Jewish people? Hagee asserts that this was the expulsion of Jews from Spain. But once again, he's a year off because that happened in 1492. And also, it's hard to put the expulsion from Spain on the same level of significance as the founding of the modern state of Israel and the reunification of Jerusalem. After all, in Jewish history, we were expelled from many, many dozens of countries, almost all the time. So for Hagee, what incredibly important event for world Jewry could take place in 2014 and 2015? Of course, 99% of Jews would not imagine, would never say, oh, it's got to be the rapture and the second coming of Jesus. Regardless, this is all academic, as Hagee took his place among the many others who erroneously thought that they had it all figured out. Now, are there any Jewish sources concerning eclipses? So the Talmud teaches in Tractate Sukkah 29a that when there is an eclipse of the sun, it is a bad omen for the nations of the world. And if there is a lunar eclipse, it is a bad omen for the Jewish people. So again, if Hagee believes that the second coming of Jesus and the rapture is the greatest news in the world for the Jewish people, that's certainly not what the Jewish sources say is implied by a total eclipse of the moon. For us, it would be a bad sign. And there's one other relevant Torah source about eclipses from the prophet Yoel, chapter 3, verses 3 to 4. There God says, I will set signs in the heavens and on earth, blood, fire, and pillars of smoke. The sun shall turn to darkness, and the moon to blood, before the coming of the day of Hashem, the day of the Lord, who is great and awesome. And these are understood to be signs that the Almighty will send to herald the destruction of the enemies of Israel that will take place in the wars of Gog and Magog prior to the coming of the Messiah. So we have significance to the signs, sometimes at least, of these eclipses, but it has absolutely nothing to do with the kinds of interpretations that were put forward by preachers like John Hagee.